right, welcome back to Top 25 Voter Pod with our Top 25 voters, Mr. Chad Conine and Mr. John Werner. John, your background looks a little more hip this week.
Well, I haven't had power at my house for about 3 days. So I've come over Chad's, and he's about the hippest.
Hanging out of my house. No.
Are you charging rent, Chad? I mean...
No, well, they brought chili last night. He brought me coffee today. So as long as he keeps bringing food, because, you know,
yeah,
I don't go to the grocery all that often. So I'll take all the food and sustenance I can get.
And this is the payoff. I get a hip background.
Yeah, by the way, that's the Foo Fighters and Drive-By Truckers albums covers over his right shoulder there.
Nice stuff. Nice stuff. Well, our music pod will come later, but for now, we'll talk a little basketball. So, John, as far as Baylor's postponed Big 12 games, only the West Virginia game has been rescheduled so far. Out of the 6 that are left, it doesn't look like those will all be able to get in. So are there certain games that should be a priority over others?
Well, the games they have scheduled right now, next week, they've got Iowa State, they've got West Virginia, and they play at Kansas. So then the Big 12 left open a week for postponed games. Now, I would like to see Baylor play 6 games in a week just to see what happens. But I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I don't think so either.
But I would like to see them, at least play two top teams. They still have games left against Texas, Texas Tech, another one against West Virginia, another one against Oklahoma. I would like to see at least 2 of those games. Well, yeah, 2 of those games in that final open week. Then maybe throw in a TCU or somebody like that. But Baylor's obviously not going to get all 18 Big 12 games in. I think best case scenario is probably 15. So I would like to see a couple of those, top half of the league opponents in there.
Let me ask you a question about that. As far as my vested interest goes in the Red Raiders.
Right.
So Texas Tech currently has games to reschedule against Iowa State and TCU. 2 games against TCU, 1 game against Iowa State. All 3 of those games are against teams in the bottom 3 of the conference. Mm-hmm. Now, when all the scheduling minds get together, would it really be fair to schedule Texas Tech to play Baylor again without, scheduling Iowa State again, for example?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's going to be a lot of controversy at the end of the season. Now, there may not be a lot of controversy if Baylor still wins by like 3 games. But if it's close, and some games are left unplayed, I think there's going to be a lot of debate about, why they rescheduled certain games.
Well, and this is where I feel like if you decide that your regular season does matter as a conference, mm-hmm. That's where I think, they still have time to punt that conference tournament.
Wouldn't that make a lot of sense?
It would absolutely make a lot of sense. And I'm talking men's and women's, because the specter of postponed games still hangs out there. There could be more that still have to be postponed. So, punt the tournaments and create some wiggle room before March Madness.
I got one for you. You ready?
Okay.
The Big 12 is Clark Griswold, and the Big 12 tournament is his Christmas bonus. And they've already built the swimming pool.
Okay. I love Christmas Vacation, so I get that reference. It may be a little bit of a reach, but I like it.
Just pull these out of thin air, or
It's just the way my mind works, Johnny.
I've started calling them chinalogies. Chad and analogy mixed together.
I like it. Yeah.
So I like coninophores though.
Yeah, I know. We can't agree on anything. Let's look at Big 12 honors. So there's a number of really great players in both the women's and men's game in terms of the Big 12. goes. Let's start with the women. Chad, who would you think is kind of the odds-on favorite for some of those top awards like Player of the Year?
Yeah, well, I think, this is a really interesting question as we come down the stretch and look at the last 2 or 3 weeks of conference play. And I think for a minute, I think that Moon Ursin was playing so well that you had to say, hey, is Moon Ursin a candidate for Player of the Year, along with, Ashley Jones from Iowa State and maybe Charlie Collier from Texas or Natasha Mack from Oklahoma State. Now, Nalissa Smith is the Big 12 preseason Player of the Year, and obviously, that was a pretty easy choice to put her in that spot. And I tell you what's happened over the last couple of games is that Nalissa Smith has really shown up and shown why she was the preseason Big 12 Player of the Year. And I think, I think she's kind of established herself in that spot now. It will be really interesting for me, at least, to see if Moon Ursin ends up giving like a first team all conference nod. I mean, she's like 5'6", 5'7", maybe. And she's out there, leading both, having game highs and rebounds. And that's pretty amazing. It speaks to a lot of athletic ability, but also a lot of basketball IQ.
How about defensive player of the year? Because I know, I feel like if I'm remembering correctly, Dee Richards won that last year.
Right. She was the national defensive player of the year last year.
Right. Yeah. So is she still playing kind of at that level of defense as their stopper?
Well, I think it's been hard to recognize and say that's been the case. But I mean, Dee Richards is also playing point guard, so she's had a lot of responsibilities, and she's getting close to double digit in assists every game, which is pretty amazing. Now, is she the same defensive attacker that she was when Chloe Jackson was playing point guard and Lauren Cox and Kalani Brown were doing the bulk of the scoring? I don't think so. I don't think the intensity is quite there, but there's a lot of factors in that. And it's not a knock on Dee because she's obviously a very valuable part of what the Lady Bears do. Now, there's probably a pretty good chance that they start to vote on Defensive Player of the Year and they just go Dee on name recognition. And it would be a deserving honor because she's still a phenomenal athlete and a phenomenal defensive player.
John, what do you see on the men's side in terms of some of those superlatives?
Yeah, this is going to be very Baylor centric, and it should be because, they're 9-0 in the conference. They've dominated. I'm going to say Jared Butler, Player of the Year. He was a preseason Player of the Year. I think he's held to that standard. He's among the league leaders in scoring, assists, even steals. He leads the Big 12 in steals. He's come a long way defensively, and he's just an incredible leader. Also a great three-point shooter. As far as defense, I'm going to go Baylor again. Davion Mitchell, I think is remarkable. And him and Mark Vital key that defense. But I think especially Davion, just the pressure he puts on guards outside. I mean, he smothers guards, and just an incredible defensive player. He could be a candidate for Player of the Year too. His offense has come along remarkably. As far as newcomer, I think that's a slam dunk with Cade Cunningham.
Yeah.
He leads the league in scoring, averaging about 18.6 points.
Chad does not agree. He's nodding, he's shaking his head.
He's an incredible player. He's just going to be here 1 year, and he'll be gone to the NBA.
Who would your pick be, Chad?
Mac McClung.
He's obviously very good.
And good.
Bigger difference maker.
Yeah.
I mean, you could make that argument. Obviously, Oklahoma State may end up getting shut out of the tournament because of their probation. So,
yeah, well, we'll see. But I don't know. I'm just ready to see some basketball games again, honestly.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
So you guys, we've talked a lot about the polls and how y'all vote on this podcast in the past weeks. Do the polls seem a little wackier this year, in the age of COVID, I guess?
I think so. I mean, Gosh, well, they're going to be out 3 weeks before they play their next game on February 23rd. Michigan was out, I think, like 3.5 weeks before they came back last weekend and beat Wisconsin. They looked great, by the way, for being off for 3.5 weeks. Let's see, Gonzaga, they were out a couple weeks in December. So everybody, all the contenders have had a lot of COVID related issues. So I think that's one reason they're wackier. I don't think people exactly know how to vote, especially like teams that haven't played in a while. I've been voting Baylor number one for about 3 weeks. This week I voted for Gonzaga. And one of the big reasons, they've been playing. And, but if Baylor had been playing the last few weeks, they would have played Tech and some other really good teams. And I'd probably still have them number one if they had beaten all those teams. So I think the COVID issue has really played into the poll wackiness.
Well, and you have bigger slides, moves ups and slides and
Yeah.
things like that. It's just kind of been all over the place. On the women's side, I think this is the third consecutive week with the new number one. UConn is number one this week after beating South Carolina last week. The week before that, South Carolina was number one. The week before that, Louisville was number one. And I think Louisville replaced somebody else as number one before that. Anyway, but here's the thing. UConn has 26 votes for number one. South Carolina, even after losing to UConn, albeit in overtime on UConn's home floor, they still got 2 first place votes a week after they lost to UConn, which was, and then further on down the line, the number 5 and 6 teams, 5th ranked Texas A&M and 6th ranked Stanford have first place votes. So it's, and honestly, personally, when I look at the poll and I look at, my system, I'm kind of tempted to throw my whole system out and just reevaluate every team and come up with a completely new top 25, because, the reason, like, I've got like teams like South Florida, and, that's just the best example in my personal rankings. South Florida has crept up. They're now number 12. I voted them this week, number 17, but I don't know that they have a win against the top 25 ranked team. They beat number 6 Mississippi State. That was December 5th, and that was their last game against the top 25 ranked team. They've only played 2, and they lost to Baylor. So they're 1-1 against the top 25, and yet they're number 12 in the country.
Yeah, I think it's hard to figure out. I agree that this is a case where absence does not make the heart grow fonder, because if you aren't playing, then I think, voters will dock you some points, as John alluded to. Even with Baylor, I don't think anybody thinks Baylor's not good, but I agree with you moving Gonzaga back to number one, John, because, they are playing. I obviously do not vote in the top 25 poll. I leave that to my intrepid beat writers here, you guys. But so I'll give you a correlation, though. I play fantasy basketball, right? And in our league that is 30 years old now, each week I do a little, what I call, power rankings of the top players in the NBA and who's kind of the leading candidate for our MVP in our league. And Kevin Durant was tearing it up early in the season. Well, now I've dropped him out of those power rankings because he's got COVID. So I think that same sort of idea holds true when you're voting on these teams in the top 25. If they're not playing, it's hard to evaluate them. It's hard to keep them maybe in that same spot, even though they still may be, plenty good. But I think we've talked about it too. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what some of these teams look like. You mentioned Michigan, John, came back and tore it up.
They were impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if it'll be interesting to see if Baylor can do the same thing, or if, rust is a factor, because I do think that there's that possibility.
Yeah, I think it could go either way. I think they'll come back playing pretty well, but boy, that is a long break, 3 weeks.
long break, and it's a lot of games to have to make up.
Yeah.
And now here the Lady Bears are canceling games not because of COVID, but because of winter weather. Welcome to 2021.
I mean, they won at West Virginia, so you could kind of punt that game, really. I mean, they already beat them there by 20 points. So if I'm the Lady Bears and I'm picking which ones to reschedule, if you have to pick, I'm like, why do we need to play that one again? So,
right. Well, you guys stay warm, and hopefully the snow will melt, and we can see some basketball again someday.
Bring on the pseudo bubble.
That's
the term I invented.
I like it.
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Great.
Rise.